on. So I'm wanting to give you an update on the Your City Centre project. It's looking at Glasgow District Regeneration Frameworks for Glasgow City Centre. As a member of the Academy, it's a pleasure to be joining you this morning, and as I say, hopefully there's scope to have a conversation today and enable further conversation with the Academy in the coming months on this project. I see that Brian's joining us as well.
Yeah, I'm just letting him.
Good morning, Brian. Are you joined the call?
Hello, guys. Good morning. Yes, sorry. I'm glad I managed to get in time for the start, Graham.
That's quite all right. You've had the benefit of hearing and seeing some of this in the recent past, Brian. So bear with me. I'll just update colleagues on the call.
I'm here as a civilian.
Very good, very good. So yeah, we've all got multiple hats, of course, Brian, more than many. So welcome to you all. As is evident to all on the call, obviously the performance of Glasgow City Centre in terms of its environmental, social, civic, cultural health is fundamental not only to the city and to the city region, but to Scotland as a whole. So getting things right in Glasgow City Centre, as Sean and colleagues have been looking at from the City Council perspective, is absolutely crucial. And of course, we're all well aware of that, the reach that Glasgow has physically and socially within the performance, as I say, of Scotland itself. As ever, we're working within an intricate policy context, and the regeneration frameworks are defined by districts that were outlined within Glasgow City Centre strategy, which is currently undergoing a refresh and renew. And the two, I suppose, planning interventions that come from the City Centre strategy are the Avenues projects that you'll all be familiar with, and the creation of these 9 districts, the first 5 of which you can see in bottom left have been published, and the next 4 of which I want to spend some time talking about this morning. And of course, there's been other ongoing work with the strategic development frameworks that Sean and others are working on, and of course the Connectivity Commission and Brian's Place Commission that's currently underway. As I've said on several occasions in the past, I'll be asking you all to redraw this plan from memory later on. These are the 9 districts that we've inherited from the City Centre strategy, and these 4 that are up on screen we undertook, my colleagues and I at Austin Smith Lord, alongside colleagues at MVRDV, Winnie Mass and his team and others. We prepared regeneration frameworks for these 4 districts in the course of 2017-2018 and published last year, and that was the multidisciplinary team that undertook that piece of work. And a similar but slightly different team has recently been appointed by the City Council, again fronted up by myself and colleagues at Austin Smith Lord, joined by Jeroen Zoetgeest, ex-MVRDV, now of Studio for New Realities, and we are taking forward the preparation of regeneration frameworks. And again, you can see the broader multidisciplinary team that we're working on that project with. So some of the same consultants, but also bringing to bear colleagues that are involved in the Avenues projects and other expertise. And as you'll know from that lineup, and as required by the City Council's brief, we are very deliberately taking an evidence-based approach. We've been, in the course of lockdown, following our inception meeting in early March, preparing and analysing and assessing data and undertaking our research, but crucially looking to enrich that with conversations such as we're having today, and in time having further conversations with the local communities, be it business, resident, culture, civic communities within that grouping. All of these regen frameworks we've taken forward under, I suppose, the umbrella of this collective endeavour and that kind of people and human-centred approach. And so it's not our project, it's not our city centre, it's very much a collective endeavour. And so the notion of the individual role within the wider collective setting of the city centre and how we can make it better has been the kind of leitmotif of the team from the get-go. And an emphasis not only on the big and the bold and the strategic and the top down, but also trying to inspire and enable community-led activity, so quick wins at a local level, as well as working through the different scales and developing a tempo and trying to, I suppose, set a challenge to ourselves and others to get things done and get a degree of urgency and some of the tasks that need to be attended to. And clearly, having secured this project in the early part of this year, the context has changed quite markedly. And in some respects, the timing is particularly apt in terms of reconsidering what Glasgow should be like in the next 5, 10, 15 years or thereby, as well as in the next 5 weeks, 5 months, and the shorter, more imminent scale. Of course, we're trying to develop some local and distinctive and local responses to some significant global challenges that we're all clearly well versed in, and previously spoke about trying to imbue some sort of a local and distinctive approach that brings together that gallousness, that sense of self-assurance with the creativity that we're aware and we all know exists within the city. But we've inherited these regeneration framework districts, but we're well aware, of course, that the character, the identity, the mental map of the city that the woman and the man in the street, and indeed that we all have of Glasgow, doesn't necessarily fit with those inherited district plans. We're also well aware that beneath that spatial aspect is some significant inequalities, whether it's with respect to health outcomes and health and social outcomes, the social and economic makeup of the city and the city centre in particular that has some very particular challenges, or indeed the ability of Glaswegians to access opportunities and indeed access the city centre to engage in that communal life, in that city life, in that city economy. And of course, our analysis is also, as many of you will have seen previously, when you start to look at it as a series of jigsaw pieces, the 9 districts themselves have very different spatial characteristics. And indeed, the 4 that we're looking at are amongst the least dense of the 9 that the City Council are looking to prepare. And when you start to look and reaffirm what you already intuitively know in terms of what is where and how the city operates, and indeed how we've disaggregated many of the uses within the city centre over time, that need to, within a compact city centre, find a better, richer blend and mix of uses and try and break down some of the persistent barriers to mixed-use development within the city centre is crucial. So in the last 3 or 4 years, with that first piece of work with MVRDV, it was a debate about trying to develop a dynamic map of what goes where and why, and start to, I suppose, build up what Brian's referred to in the past as a kind of an anthology or a scrapbook of a phenomenal number of possibilities and opportunities, but trying to then boil them down into, well, what are the priorities and what best aligns with what the city centre is requiring. And I think we had an amnesty last time round. When we got to the 41st strategy, we thought, well, we've got enough strategies now. Can we try and boil this down in terms of what does it mean for the city centre at a local and a regional level, and how do we then align that in terms of these plans, so we can then start to ensure that we can break down silos. And we feel fundamentally it's not just about the plan, but also the process of preparing the plan and delivering the plan. And we, time and again, as you will all be aware, face into the challenge of silo mentality, silo thinking, and trying to break down those barriers within public and private and third sector organisations to make sure that we've got a team and a Team Glasgow approach that's able to take forward this task, we think is absolutely crucial. And of course, we benefit from a city centre strategy board, but let's make sure that that political will is well aligned, and the urgency of that political will from local government to national government make sure that the national priority of the city centre is gets that focus and gets that investment. And of course, following Future City Demonstrator and other smart city initiatives, surely there are ways in which we can be more nimble and more agile in terms of monitoring the city's performance and tweaking the levers of policy and investment in a way which makes sure that we can adapt more quickly and understand as a citizen, but also in terms of decision makers, how to go forward. So I'll crash through these slides. Many of you will have seen them before, but the analysis that we undertook 2 or 3 years ago reaffirmed what we already intuitively knew, that the city was underpopulated. And of course, the city centre residential strategies come forward to suggest a doubling from the 20,000 towards 40,000 by 2030. What that therefore means with respect to the opportunities with the obvious gap sites, the underused spaces, the vacant upper floors, the difficult to develop parts of the city centre to double that density towards what, say, central Dublin has, or indeed go beyond that to what other European neighbours such as Stockholm enjoy, but always ensuring, and the interesting conversations that we've had thus far about trying to make sure that that local community infrastructure, the health, the social care, the education infrastructure is there to support that population, which is currently not there, is going to be absolutely crucial. And when we presented to the Connectivity Commission, reflecting on the finite amount of open space in the city, the disproportionate ratio of road space in comparison to the equivalent areas of other cities elsewhere in the UK was quite apparent. And of course, that's a function of Glasgow's compact grid, of the fact it's got the M8 motorway. But of course, when you start to look at how we use that finite amount of space, then evidently there's scope to readjust that. And you're all well versed and well familiar with the agenda with respect to active travel, walking, wheeling and cycling. But also we felt, opportunity to use and optimize the urban grid that we've inherited, the legacy of the past, in a way which can, as has been done elsewhere in Barcelona and elsewhere, use a more intelligent approach to that grid to redefine how we optimize the space that we have in different ways and try and encourage and transform parts of the city centre so that they truly do become the backbone of local communities, be, as I say, the business, resident or a mixed use community within different districts of the city centre. And of course, the last 4 or 5 months have demonstrated where there's a will, there is a way to prototype and to trial and test new things. And we would be eager to do that, but do it in a way which demonstrates value, creates positive new memory, not just do it for the sake of doing it, but try and get beyond that perception that things can't happen here. And Glasgow's been good at that in the past. Of course, we faced into the perennial issue of a more joined up, seamless public transport network. Our Dutch friends were bewildered by the deregulation of the bus network and the amount of dead mileage that we have on our bus network. But also they were struck by, notwithstanding the beaching cuts and the removal of St Enoch, that we still have a legacy of 6 mainline railway stations and the subway network within the city centre. So let's capitalise on that regional transport network, but enhance it so that a network that was built for a far higher urban density and population can fulfil that in a way which is a quality passenger experience that's comfortable, that's alluring, and it's appealing. And of course, that's a broader and bigger challenge in this post-COVID physically distant world. And of course, the edges of the city and the lack of green space in the city were something that struck our colleagues and were reaffirmed by our own analysis. So the Dear Green Place, of course, has very little of the stuff in the city centre. And it's not a new story and not a new notion, but this notion of reimagining the river corridor and genuinely reconnecting both sides with perhaps more bridges, but continuous quaysides along both north and south banks, activating the water, activating the water's edge, and creating that seamless network from Glasgow Green to the Riverside Museum and beyond is so self-evident, but a challenge that we persist making more difficult by introducing yet more severance between the city and its water's edge. So, yet again, asking questions about, well, are we making the right investment in terms of public transport and road infrastructure to create a seamless environment that's going to attract people to the water's edge, to attract business to invest there, to activate that water's edge in ways? And why not, consider introducing traffic on the water? And of course, folk then point to, well, we had one before Sun, but yes, it was going to the absolute last place it should have been, an out-of-town shopping centre down at Brayhead. If we're going to do water taxis, make them convenient, make them part of the experience of going to and from the hydro or the science centre or wherever the destination may be. And of course, we faced into the issue of the M8 and trying to repair that severance, reflecting on the significant regional investment that's been made to allow traffic and heavy vehicles to take alternative routes beyond the city centre, and then untangle the motorway spaghetti that we've got with an intense frequency of 5 motorway junctions in spaces that you would more normally have 1 or 2. Perhaps look in ways in which we can selectively prune that on and off-ramp network, win back space, and remove the blight that the motorway has created with a kind of corridor of underdeveloped land on either side, and find ways in which to reconfigure and reimagine ways in which we can use that infrastructure in innovative ways. If we're talking about designing for wind and rain, then the largest 24/7 publicly accessible covered space is currently given over to 65 car parking spaces. Surely there are ways in which we can use that more positively. And at the very least, whilst we can't necessarily turn back the clock to recreate Anderson Cross, we can certainly do better than what we've got at the minute and repair those connections between the city centre and areas beyond the city that are starting to thrive, such as Finniston, so you then create that seamless connection and a warm and clear welcome into the city centre. So that's the work that was done previously. And if time allows, Sean, I'd just quickly like to give a flavor of the next 4 regeneration frameworks, because we really want to, benefit from the wisdom and intelligence on this call to suggest, okay, well, what happens in these next 4 regen frameworks? And they're very diverse parts of the city. So when it's called the Merchant City, it's the Merchant City as we would all know and love, but it also extends beyond Salt Market, Glasgow Cross and the High Street to encompass parts of London Road, the Gallowgate and up to Duke Street. So a very diverse area with very local and recurring challenges. The Learning Quarter does include, of course, the Strathclyde University and parts of the Innovation District. It also includes Ladywell, the Tennant's Brewery, the Necropolis, the Cathedral Precinct, the Infirmary. So, and interestingly, it doesn't include any primary or secondary schools. So it's a learning quarter if you're in the higher and further education sphere. In Townhead, you've got the high-rise and the mid-rise flats that you would know as Townhead and the Junction 15, but also Glasgow City College and some of the depots, the sorting office, the John Lewis Distribution Centre to the north on the motorway itself. And then Cowcaddens goes all the way from the Cannon bus station in the southeast, right away across to Woodside, up to the canal, but encompasses the parts of the School of Art, the Royal Conservatoire, Scottish Opera, Fire and Rescue, Police, and of course Glasgow Caley University. So again, a very diverse district, very different to the ones that we've looked at before. And of course, a legacy of some of that infrastructure, the canal network, of course, some of the lost railway infrastructure that's left its mark, and of course, the introduction of the motorway itself, as we've already touched upon, and the legacy of comprehensive redevelopment areas of Cowcaddens and Townhead in the more recent past. So taking a clear focus in terms of quality of life and trying to face into the socioeconomic and health agendas that we've touched upon, as well as, of course, climate change adaptation and a community focus, we've started to develop a framework to look at the local, the micro scale, and the regional macro scale. And I suppose pick up on, and I appreciate, Brian, it's not a scalar trio, but thinking about how this physical part of the city can be conceived of, borrowing Brian Evans' thinking in terms of Glasgow City as an international city, as a metropolitan city, as an everyday city. What are the facets of the physical districts that we're looking at, and how do they play into that agenda with respect to how the city is conceived of every day, but also how it contributes to that metropolitan regional setting and Glasgow's position and contribution as an international city as well. So our principal focus, first and foremost, is about getting the basics right in the everyday city and ensuring that the setting for that regional setting and that international setting is crucial. And of course, when you start to look at these 4 districts, the initial reaction can sometimes be, well, that's not the core city centre, and indeed, some respects, we think that may be to our benefit in this project, but always remembering that this is also asset rich. Glasgow started here, the High Street and the Cathedral. We have 2 universities, the City of Glasgow College. We've got 2 leading arts and drama schools with international reputations. It's the most, in terms of population density, the most densely populated part of the city centre, or certainly pockets of it are. We've got Scotland's first innovation district, the busiest bus station in the country, lots of space to make transformation. And so if we can be inventive, then perhaps we can create something that very much dovetails with the core city centre to the south and west. And this yin-yang diagram, which is not only an analysis of the city as found, but also speaks perhaps of the harmony and the complementarity that we can try and achieve in terms of not trying to create more of the same in terms of extending that city centre north and east, but creating something that's distinctive, that's different, and that adds something that will make Glasgow more resilient and enable it to thrive in the 21st century. So the question therefore is, what might that be in terms of a productive place, a creative economy, and a great place to live and to have a business in, for instance, or to learn and to study. And you can very clearly see that dichotomy between the southwest and the northeast hemispheres of the city centre in the aerial photograph. And I suppose we are trying to, and from time to time, very deliberately turning the map different ways to take a different and fresh look at the city from a different perspective and start to see the ways in which we can make connections, restore, and attend to that severance, and reconnect to the communities and the neighbourhoods to the north, the northeast, and the east of the city. See it from their perspective and look at ways in which we can capitalise on the investment that's occurring in other parts of the city to make sure that interface and that gateway to the city centre becomes far more appealing, far more effective, so that we can broaden the benefit to communities in the east, northeast, and north of the city. So of course, we're capitalising on investment that's already underway with the avenues. When you start to map the Innovation District, the Lauriston, Colton Barras and Sighthill transformational regeneration areas, the regional hospital, the university and college campuses, other master plans that are coming forward, there is already change underway, but what change beyond that should we start to then compose? What agendas should we be prioritising and tackling, and how can we progress that going forward? So the team that, as I say, is multidisciplinary, has been working, having met in, I think it was the 5th of March, we had the inception meeting. We were almost immediately into a lockdown phase. We've been working through lockdown to build that baseline. We've been having conversations such as this with community councils, with universities, with other stakeholders. We've been doing some public events as well, but we're looking to then start to move into a point where in the autumn we can start to develop conversations, not necessarily in the way that we would have wished and enjoyed in the past, on street, in situ, physically and socially together, but trying to find different ways in which we can deal with that. And so yes, we have online platforms such as the Commonplace, and I'd urge you to comment and to contribute on that platform, but we're also looking to have different ways to reach local people, whether it's providing a free phone line for those that don't have access to the internet, whether it's engaging through local community groups, the residents and housing association groupings, and others. So any guidance or thoughts you've got on that would be gratefully received and appreciated. But we do hope that at some point in the near future we can get to a point where we can be socially together, physically distant, but having conversations that are creative and that enable us to contemplate a future for us all that faces into, but doesn't fixate on the post-COVID environment, but then starts to tackle some of the long-standing issues and come up with something fresh and new for this part of Glasgow. So I'd very much welcome your guidance on that this morning. Thanks for your attention.